Hi everyone, it's Sandy and today I'm filming my June wrap-up, so I'll be talking about all the books that I read in June. June was kind of a busy month because I did spend like a whole week or two just recovering from being at Book Expo and BookCon, and during those 2 weeks I barely read anything. A majority of the books that I finished were actually audiobooks, so jumping into the very first book that I read in June, that would be Seafire by Natalie C. Parker. I had an arc of this book for such a long time and I was finally able to get to it. This book follows our main character Caledonia, and 4 years ago her family was actually killed by this corrupt warlord and his army of bullets. And over the next few years, she has actually become the captain of her own ship, and she has built a crew full of girls and women that have lost their own family and friends due to this corrupt warlord. One day, Caledonia's ship is attacked, and her best friend and second in command nearly dies until she is saved by a bullet. Although Caledonia does not want to have this guy on her ship, she does take him in as a prisoner, and she hopes to use him to take down the corrupt warlords, and the story kind of goes from there. I had so much fun listening to the audiobook of this because it's narrated by Rebecca Soler. I think she's a fantastic narrator. Since Caledonia is the captain of an all-female ship, I really love seeing the sisterhood that is portrayed throughout the novel. It's always great seeing a group of women being very supportive and encouraging of one another. I also like that the story did not focus on a romance, although there is a developing relationship between the main character Caledonia and the prisoner Bullet that they take on ship. I personally don't really like this developing relationship because I just don't feel a connection between these two characters, and I just don't sense any chemistry whatsoever. So every time they had these romantic little interactions, it just felt a bit forced and unnatural. There are hints of a sapphic relationship between two side characters, and I would have loved to see more of that in the story. One of these side characters actually communicates using sign language, and she is the healer on the ship, and I thought her character was just really interesting. I loved learning about her past because she is a former bullet, so she has gone through a lot of trauma, and she is suffering from PTSD, and she's in recovery from an addiction. So I definitely really enjoyed learning about her character in particular. I also really enjoyed all the other side characters. There are several of them that are pretty distinct characters and have a pretty big presence in the story, and I really enjoyed seeing how all of their different roles come together to help the ship function. The overall plot of the story is to take down this corrupt warlord, but there is a subplot to the story that I think really added to the overall plot, and when that subplot was revealed, it changes the direction of things, and it definitely put a lot more things at stake. I'm not going to go into the subplot, but I really think it added a lot to the story in a very good way. So overall, I love the premise of the story and that it focuses on an all-female crew. This was an audiobook that I started right before Book Expo. Book Expo and BookCon was pretty much an entire week. So during that entire week, I did not listen to this book at all. So it took me a lot longer to finish this book, but because I took a week off from listening to the story, once I started to get back into it, it did take me a while to get back into it because I felt like the middle part of the story kind of dragged a little bit. So overall, I did really enjoy it and I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished in June is A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahereh Mafi, and I also listened to this as an audiobook. Before I get into the plot of the story, I do want to give trigger warnings for xenophobia and Islamophobia. This story takes place a year after 9/11 and it follows our main character Shireen, who is a Muslim teenager. She has recently moved and transferred to a new school where she meets this boy named Ocean, and they begin to develop feelings for each other. But while this is happening, Shireen is also trying to navigate a world that can be extremely hateful of who she is. So there is breakdancing incorporated into the novel, and I really love that. The main character's brother ends up forming a breakdancing club and she joins it, and I really enjoyed seeing all of the characters that are part of the breakdancing club, which mostly consists of her brother's friends, and I just really love this whole group dynamic because Shireen was like the younger sister and these other guys were like the older brothers who were truly supportive and truly caring of one another. I just really love seeing her relationship with her older brother. It was really heartwarming and it's just really nice to see a positive sibling relationship. I did really like Ocean and Shireen, but I didn't really care about the romance between them. The story does tackle a lot of important issues regarding the way Shireen is treated and reasons for why she chooses to wear a scarf, but it focuses heavily on the romance along the way. I can understand Shireen's choices to distance herself from Ocean, but I hated that she was making the decision for him and that she was essentially deciding what was best without discussing it with him. And as for the ending, it was definitely foreshadowed, but I still felt like it came out of nowhere and it was just kind of thrown in last minute. The way it ended felt so abrupt. The ending was open-ended. It leaves you wanting more, but not in a satisfying way. So overall, I did give this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished this month is one of my favorite books that I read this year, and that is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. In case you didn't know, Mira Grant is a pen name for Shannon McGuire, who wrote the Wayward Children series, which I still need to continue. I've only read the first book in that series, but this is a book that I first heard about from Riley Marie, and all I knew about it is that that it had to do with killer mermaids. So before I get into the synopsis, I do want to give a trigger warning for this book. It involves violence, death, blood, and gore. A lot of the deaths that happen in the book are pretty graphic, so definitely be aware of that. So the story is set in 2022, and 7 years ago, in 2015, an entertainment company gathered a group of scientists and actors to set off on a ship to film a mockumentary on mermaids. The ship eventually lost communication and was found 6 weeks later completely abandoned with no bodies recovered. So it is now 2022 and a new crew has been assembled to seek answers to what happened in 2015. This book was terrifying and I never want to be stuck in the middle of the ocean after reading this. I kid you not, the day after I finished this book, my dad literally suggested that we should go on a cruise for a family vacation one day, and I was just like, nope. The story is pretty slow paced because after we got that backstory of what happened in 2015, the beginning of the story focuses on introducing all these characters that are going to be a part of this new crew and explaining what their roles are. There are a lot of characters in the story, so it was interesting to learn about these characters, but because of the introductions, it just made the story very slow paced. Despite the slow pace of the story, the atmosphere was very tense and eerie, and because of the whole vibe of the story and the whole just plot in general, I was constantly at the edge of my seat wanting to know what would happen next. This was just a book I did not want to put down. There are so many different scientific disciplines that are mentioned in the story, and most of them do kind of go over my head because I am not a sciencey person whatsoever. But in general, it was just so fascinating to learn about. The whole book revolves around mermaids, and there's not much that is known about mermaids, and I found it to be really interesting to learn how they communicated with one another. I was just so intrigued and curious about these mermaids. I wanted to know everything about them. I also really appreciated seeing the different representations in the story. One of the main characters is Tori, and her sister was actually on the first crew in 2015. Her sister died and she wants to know what happened, so she is now joining this new crew. And she's also a bisexual marine biologist who specializes in sonar. There are also identical twins in the book named Heather and Holly. They are both deaf and they communicate using sign language. One of them is an organic chemist, and then the other one owns this submersible that would allow her to go deep into the water. There's another character named Mr. Blackwell who experiences chronic pain and is physically disabled. There's also Olivia, who is a media personality. It was really interesting to see the role that she played on the ship. She's essentially kind of a reporter, and she's reporting and giving updates on what's happening on the ship regarding the research and any new discoveries. Olivia is a lesbian, and I believe she's on the autism spectrum. So there's definitely a wide range of different characters in the story, and it was really interesting to learn about them and seeing all the discoveries that they were making and their overall contribution to the understanding of mermaids. And as for the ending, I thought it was a bit confusing and kind of abrupt as well. I do look forward to reading the sequel though. I don't know when it's out actually, but overall I'd give this like a 4.25 out of 5 stars, and I would love to see the story being adapted into like a TV show or something because I think that would be so cool. The fourth book that I finished in June is probably my most disappointing read of the year, and that is Defy Me by Tahereh Mafi. I'm not going to give a synopsis of this book because it is the 5th book in the Shatter Me series. There's just one more book left in the series, and this book pretty much picks up where the last book ended off at. I felt like where things left off in the previous book wasn't fully explained in this book, so it just kind of left me confused about what actually happened. So in this book, we have a third character's point of view added, and that is Kenji. And as much as I love Kenji, it was just weird going through 4 books without his point of view to suddenly have his point of view. And under the circumstances of the plot of this book, I understand why the author did that. I just wanted to focus on Juliet and Warner. But once we got to Juliet and Warner, the first half of the story and both of their perspectives were essentially flashbacks, and I'm just like, why? All of these flashbacks just left me really confused. All these timelines just eventually blurred together, and I'm just like, what is happening? What time period are we in? What? I just don't understand anything. It also could have been the fact that I was listening to the audiobook version of this, so that might have made the timeline a lot more confusing. We would have chapters in Warner and Julia's point of view that would initially start off with a flashback, but then a few pages later it would shift to a present timeline, and I just didn't like that. I really did not care about the flashbacks. I just felt like it made this format of the story pretty messy, and in general, most of Warner and Julia's chapters were just info dumpy, and honestly I was bored. So I'm looking through this book and I see that all the flashbacks are italicized. Obviously italicized text does not translate well in audiobook format, so probably the audiobook isn't the best way to read the story. So unfortunately I did not enjoy this book very much, but I do want to finish the series because there is one book left, and I do want to know what happens next and how the whole series will be wrapped up. So because a lot of Warner and Juliet's chapters were pretty info dumpy, I just felt like overall not a lot happens in in this book, so I ended up rating it a 2 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I finished in June is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. After hearing so many great things about the book, I finally picked it up, and this story follows Alex, who is the first son to the first female president. Alex is also bisexual, and he's half Mexican, half white, and his mom is currently running for re-election. The story begins with Alex attending a royal wedding in England, and a disaster occurs involving his nemesis, Prince Henry. In order to repair the damages, Alex and Henry are forced to fake a bromance. However, once they begin getting to know each other, they also begin to develop feelings for each other. Before I talk about Alex and Henry, I do want to take this moment to show my appreciation for all of these side characters in the story. The author does an amazing job just creating these side characters and making me love so many of them. Alex's best friend Nora, his sister June, and the deputy chief of staff Zara. There were just so many side characters in the story that I really loved. They were fantastic, and I just loved their overall presence. So now we're going to talk about Henry and Alex. They were both wonderful characters, individually and together. Alex can be really hilarious and snarky, and Henry is just a soft, precious cinnamon roll. They were both super charming, and you can really tell that they truly cared a lot about the other person. I really like seeing both of them come to terms with their sexuality, and also the discussion of how being in a political position impacts how one expresses their identity to the public. So going into the story, I was expecting more of an enemies to lover type of romance, and while it did initially begin like that, it really didn't take that long for the enemies to lover trope to play out, but it never really felt like Henry and Alex didn't like each other. There was a misunderstanding between them, but it still felt pretty petty for Alex to not like Henry because of that. So on a different topic regarding the sex scenes in the story, they can be pretty long, and they could also kind of be really descriptive, but it was also really vague at the same time, and I know that sounds really contradictory, like how does that even happen? I love Alex and Henry, and they were such a cute couple, but the way the sex scenes were written just made me question like what is even going on, because I can't understand what's happening. I really love the ending. It was very heartwarming, and it left me feeling very hopeful. Overall, I rated this a 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't entirely love this book. There really wasn't much that I disliked about the story, but it did take me a while to get into the story. But I also don't think I like the fact that it was written in third person. I would have preferred for the story to be written in first person instead, just because when it comes to contemporary, I just really love being in the main character's point of view and just seeing how the story plays out in their eyes. So those are kind of my minor dislikes on the story, but it really wasn't much to make me not like the book because I still really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I would highly recommend it. So those are all of the books that I finished in June. If you've read any of the books that I talked about, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!